My sister-in-law sold my dead grandma's recipe book on eBay for $50 to pay for her spray tan. So I made her anniversary cake out of cardboard and shaving cream, then watched her try to cut into it in front of 200 guests while family members started revealing she'd also stolen Brett's baseball cards, his dad's watch, and borrowed $3,000 from various relatives for emergencies that funded her shopping sprees until Brett finally saw the truth and left with the kids. My brother Brett and I used to be inseparable. We'd been best friends since we were kids, building terrible tree houses that violated several safety codes. The only problem? His wife Jillian, who treated me like I was personally responsible for global warming. I'd tried everything to win Jillian's approval. I babysat their twin boys every Friday night while they attended wine tastings where Jillian pretended she wasn't just there for the free alcohol. I fixed their garbage disposal when it started shrieking at 3 a.m. I even ate her cooking experiments that could have doubled as industrial adhesive. But Jillian acted like my mere existence offended her. Brett had developed a supernatural ability to excuse Jillian's behavior. When Jillian forgot to invite me to Brett's surprise birthday party she'd been planning for 3 months, Brett assured me she was just overwhelmed. When she announced at Christmas dinner that I was giving off divorced dad energy because I brought store-bought cookies, Brett laughed like she'd said something clever. Jillian could commit armed robbery, and Brett would compliment her choice of getaway car. 3 weeks ago, Jillian barged into my apartment demanding my grandmother's recipe book, a leather journal filled with 7 decades of family recipes, each page stained with vanilla extract and memories. Jillian was starting a food blog and needed authentic vintage content to monetize. I explained that Grandma Rose had given me that book just before she died 6 months ago. Each recipe included her handwritten notes like Tommy's favorite and doubles perfectly for church potluck. Jillian rolled her eyes and snapped that dead people don't need recipes, and I was selfishly hoarding potential content. When Brett arrived after Jillian texted him that I was being aggressive, he didn't ask questions. He immediately started lecturing me about supporting Jillian's dreams and letting go of the past. He actually called it just some old recipes, while Jillian stood behind him, victorious. I ended up having to kick them both out. Then came Brett and Jillian's 5th anniversary party, an event Jillian had planned with military precision. I'd decided to make peace by baking Grandma Rose's legendary triple chocolate cake, the recipe that had won 3 county fairs and once made a judge propose to her on the spot. I couldn't find the recipe book anywhere. After ransacking my apartment, I called Brett. The silence stretched so long I checked if we'd been disconnected. Finally, he mumbled something about checking with Jillian. 20 minutes later, Brett appeared at my door looking nauseated. The truth came out in pieces. Jillian had taken the book during a visit 2 weeks ago while I was at work. She'd photographed some recipes, decided that was enough for her blog aesthetic, and sold it on eBay to someone in Portland for $50. Her reasoning, delivered through Brett like he was reading a statement, was that I needed to let go of unhealthy attachments and she needed money for her spray tan. She'd literally traded my family history for orange skin. I stood there, rage building in my chest, while Brett offered weak excuses about Jillian being stressed about the party. Then something shifted. Instead of exploding, I smiled. Don't worry about the cake. I'll handle everything. My baker friend Carlos owed me a favor from when I'd helped him move a commercial oven. When I explained the situation, his eyes lit up with mischievous glee. We spent all night creating Jillian's dream anniversary cake. 5 flawless tiers that looked ready to be professionally photographed. The sugar roses seemed to bloom before your eyes. The gold leaf sparkled like real treasure. It was the kind of cake that made people stop mid-conversation to stare. The foundation? Reinforced cardboard covered in just enough frosting to look legitimate. The filling between layers was mostly shaving cream mixed with food coloring. The gorgeous chocolate ganache strip, hair gel mixed with cocoa powder. Carlos had outdone himself with the structural engineering, ensuring it would hold together until that crucial first cut. Loading the masterpiece into my car this morning, I thought about Grandma Rose. She used to say the best recipes weren't just about ingredients, they were about intention. This cake definitely had intention. But the question that kept circling my mind was if Brett would finally recognize what his wife had become when her perfect party became a disaster. Either way, Grandma Rose would have appreciated the irony. Jillian wanted authentic family recipes. She was about to discover that in our family, revenge was a dish best served as a 5-tiered architectural nightmare. What would you have done? I arrived at the anniversary party venue 40 minutes early, the fake cake secured in a temperature-controlled box that Carlos had insisted on. The grand pavilion looked exactly like something Jillian would choose, all glass and chrome with Instagram-worthy lighting. I maneuvered the cake cart through the service entrance, avoiding the main doors where Jillian was probably already directing staff like a discount wedding planner. The display table sat in the center of the reception area, draped in white linen with gold accents. I carefully transferred the cake from the box, making sure each tier aligned perfectly. The sugar roses caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It looked magnificent. Jillian materialized beside me within seconds, her spray-tanned arms crossed. She circled the table like a shark, examining every angle. I kept my expression neutral while she pointed at the cake's position. She directed me to rotate it 45 degrees to catch the light from the west windows. I complied. 2 minutes later, she wanted it moved 6 inches to the left, then back to the right, then rotated again because the gold leaf wasn't catching the light properly for her phone camera. By the 3rd repositioning, my hands were starting to shake, not from effort, but from suppressing laughter at what would happen when she cut into this masterpiece. Brett appeared as I was adjusting the cake for the 4th time. He wrapped me in one of his signature bear hugs, the kind that used to mean everything was okay between us. He leaned close to my ear and whispered his thanks for coming despite everything. The sincerity in his voice almost made me reconsider. Almost. Jillian had her phone out immediately, the red recording light glowing as she captured our embrace. She narrated for her live stream audience about family unity and forgiveness, twisting the moment into content. I glanced at her phone screen. 47 viewers, most with usernames like botfollower3847 and click here for prizes. She kept mentioning how the party was going viral and thanking her thousands of fans for their support. That's when she said it, casual as discussing the weather. She mentioned selling old junk from the attic to fund this spectacular celebration. My stomach clenched. Old junk. That's what 7 decades of family history had become to her. The twins, Marcus and Mason, spotted me from across the room. They broke away from the kids' activity corner and ran over, their matching bow ties slightly askew. Marcus grabbed my hand while Mason hugged my leg, both talking over each other about their new new soccer cleats and a frog they'd found in the backyard. They asked if I could sit with them during dinner. Jillian swooped in before I could answer, her voice syrupy sweet as she redirected them to the children's table on the far side of the room. She explained that adult tables were for adults and promised them extra cake if they behaved. The boys' faces fell, but they obediently trudged away. Jillian's smile never wavered as she assigned me to table 12, coincidentally the one furthest from the main table and partially blocked by a decorative pillar. I pulled out my phone to record some of the setup, wanting evidence of the intact cake before the reveal. The battery icon showed 15%. I'd forgotten to charge it last night, too focused on cake construction. I switched it to power saving mode, needing to preserve what little remained for the crucial moment. Brett adjusted his cufflinks while chatting with his college roommate near the bar. He mentioned something about missing his father's watch, the one their dad had worn every day until he passed. Brett seemed to think he'd misplaced it during their recent move. I knew better. That watch was probably adorning someone's wrist in Seattle or Phoenix by now, purchased for a fraction of its worth. Two women from Jillian's book club huddled near the gift table, their voices carrying. One mentioned lending Jillian $300 for a medical emergency 6 months ago. The other nodded knowingly. She was still waiting for Jillian to repay the $500 she'd borrowed for car repairs. They wondered aloud if they'd ever see that money again. Jillian called me over to help arrange the dessert display around the cake. She positioned me carefully, having me hold reflectors and adjust decorations while she snapped photos. Each shot required precise staging, me just out of frame, visible enough to be useful but never included in the actual images. She posted each one immediately, adding filters and hashtags about her perfect party planning skills. My phone buzzed. Carlos texted asking if I needed moral support, offering to swing by after his afternoon shift. I thanked him but declined. This was something I needed to handle alone. Besides, his presence might raise questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. My Aunt Patricia stopped by the cake table, admiring the display. She mentioned trying to find the family photo album she'd lent Brett last Christmas, the one with all the pictures from Grandma Rose's 90th birthday party. She'd wanted to make copies for the memorial service but couldn't locate it anywhere. I made sympathetic noises while mentally adding another item to Jillian's theft inventory. The coat check area erupted in minor chaos as two servers collided, sending a rack of jackets tumbling. I rushed over to help, gathering scattered coats and reorganizing the chaos. A flutter of papers caught my eye. Receipts falling from a designer jacket I recognized as Jillian's. I glanced around before picking them up. Pawn shop receipts dated over the past 6 months, a silver tea service for $80, men's vintage watches for $200, antique picture frames for $50. Each receipt another piece of family history converted to cash. I snapped quick photos with my dying phone before tucking the receipts back where I'd found them. The DJ announced cake cutting would happen in 2 hours, after dinner service. I watched Brett across the room, laughing with his friends, blissfully unaware of what his wife had been doing. He looked genuinely happy, more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. A knot formed in my stomach. Was I doing the right thing? My cousin Emma appeared at my elbow, nursing a glass of wine. She mentioned that Jillian had asked to borrow her grandmother's pearl brooch last month for a special event. The brooch hadn't been returned yet, despite Emma's gentle reminders. Jillian kept claiming she'd already given it back, making Emma question her own memory. I retreated to a quiet corner and scrolled through old text messages, needing distraction from the growing tension. A message from Brett jumped out, sent 3 months ago. I know Jillian can be difficult. She's going through something right now. Please be patient with her. She means well. Jillian's voice carried across the room as she regaled a table of Brett's co-workers with the story of how I'd refused to help with party planning. In her version, she'd begged me to be involved, but I'd been too selfish and stubborn. She painted herself as the forgiving sister-in-law, still including me despite my difficult attitude. The co-workers made appropriate sympathetic noises. The photographer Jillian had hired was clearly working on a budget. He spent most of his time photographing the decorations, the cake, and the venue itself rather than capturing candid moments between guests. When he did photograph people, Jillian directed every shot, ensuring she was centered and perfectly lit, while everyone else became supporting characters in her show. I approached one of the catering staff during a quiet moment, casually mentioning that the cake had some special dietary considerations they should know about. The server barely glanced up from arranging appetizers, muttering something about being too understaffed to worry about special requests. They had 3 other events that day and were already running behind. I decided to stop trying to warn people. Better to wait and watch, studying Jillian's patterns and behavior. She moved through the party like a director, adjusting people's positions, suggesting conversation topics, ensuring every moment could be captured for content. Her phone never left her hand. While helping arrange gifts on the designated table, I noticed a card from Brett's mentor at the architectural firm. Jillian had told Brett that Mr. Davidson couldn't attend due to a scheduling conflict, yet here was his gift and card, suggesting he'd planned to come. Another relationship Jillian had quietly severed. Throughout the cocktail hour, 3 different relatives pulled me aside for quiet conversations. Each mentioned lending Jillian money over the past year. The amounts varied, $200 here, $500 there, but the pattern was consistent. Emergency loans that were never repaid, always with elaborate excuses about why she needed the cash. I did quick mental math. Between the loans and the pawned items, Jillian had extracted thousands from the family. And for what? Her successful food blog showed 12 posts in 8 months, most with single-digit engagement. Her lifestyle exceeded any visible income source. Mark, Brett's roommate from college who now worked at the same firm, found me by the bar. He looked uncomfortable as he mentioned that Brett had been sleeping in his home office lately. When pressed for details, Mark clammed up, mumbling something about it not being his business. But the worry in his eyes spoke volumes. I tried to share this information with Emma, pulling her aside near the kitchen entrance. She listened but kept glancing away, clearly uncomfortable. When I finished, she sighed and delivered the phrase I'd been dreading. It's not my marriage. She didn't want to get involved in whatever was happening between Brett and Jillian. Jillian must have noticed Mark and me talking because she appeared moments later, a fresh glass of wine in each hand. She pressed one into Mark's hand and launched into animated conversation about the firm's latest project. Her laugh was too loud, her gestures too expansive. Mark excused himself after a few minutes, claiming he needed to find the restroom. Brett joined our little group, but his attention wasn't on the conversation. He kept checking his phone, his forehead creased with concern. When Jillian asked what was wrong, he brushed it off as work stuff, but I knew my brother's tells. Something was eating at him, something he couldn't or wouldn't share. The party continued around us, a swirl of forced conversations and staged moments. Jillian's mask never slipped, her performance never wavered, but I watched, I waited, and I counted down the minutes until cake cutting, when her perfect facade would finally crack. Jillian directed me to help with kitchen duties, pointing toward the service area with her wine glass. The head caterer looked harried as I entered, immediately handing me a tray of appetizers to arrange. Through the kitchen's pass-through window, I watched important party moments unfold, while I stayed hidden among the staff. The pattern felt familiar. This exact method had driven Brett's sister away 3 years ago. Death by 1,000 small exclusions, each one deniable on its own. Uncle Ray wandered into the kitchen looking for ice. He mentioned seeing Jillian at the house 2 weeks ago, when he'd stopped by to return Brett's power tools. She'd been loading boxes of what she called old photos nobody looks at anymore into her car. The timeline clicked into place. That visit happened the same day my recipe book disappeared. My hands tightened on the serving tray as the systematic nature of her thefts became clear. The DJ's playlist continued without my requested song, the one Brett and I had danced to at his wedding. When I approached the booth between kitchen runs, the DJ shrugged and showed me his list. My song had been crossed out in red pen, too full, written beside it in Jillian's handwriting. Another small cruelty, another invisible cut designed to remind me of my place. I pulled out my phone and opened a notes app, my battery now at 12%. Each detail went into a growing timeline: dates, items, amounts, witnesses. The list grew longer with every conversation, painting a picture of methodical exploitation. My thumb moved quickly across the screen, documenting everything before my phone died. Guests at the main tables complained about the wine quality, while Jillian's new designer shoes caught the light as she walked. The shoes alone probably cost more than the entire beverage budget. She'd claimed financial constraints when ordering the cheap wine, but her outfit told a different story. Several cousins exchanged knowing glances but remained silent, their complicity hanging heavy in the air. A chatty caterer mentioned Jillian's attempt to reduce their payment that morning. She'd claimed a miscommunication about the guest count, trying to dock 20% despite the signed contract. The catering manager had threatened to leave with all the food, forcing Jillian to pay the full amount. The server seemed pleased to share this gossip with someone who'd actually listen. Brett's coworker pulled me aside near the kitchen entrance. She'd fielded multiple calls from Jillian over the past months, each claiming a family emergency that required Brett to leave immediately. The emergencies never materialized, but the pattern disrupted Brett's work enough that his performance reviews had suffered. His promotion prospects dimmed with each manufactured crisis. I continued documenting, building a mental case file with each new revelation. The urge to confront burned in my chest, but patience would serve as a better weapon. Jillian's carefully constructed image depended on maintaining control. Waiting for the right moment would make the impact stronger. The cake cutting got pushed back another hour. Jillian wanted the sunset lighting for her photos, insisting the golden hour would make her content go viral. The delay meant more guests leaving early, but she didn't seem to notice or care. Her focus remained fixed on creating the perfect social media moment. Emma found me restocking napkins in the service area. Her resistance had crumbled after a few more glasses of wine. She admitted Jillian owed her $300, borrowed for a dental emergency, that somehow resulted in a shopping spree instead. Jillian had sworn Emma to secrecy, claiming Brett would overreact if he knew about the loan. The debt network revealed itself with each confession. A crash from the main room interrupted our conversation. Jillian had knocked over a tray while gesticulating dramatically at the catering staff. Her mask slipped for just a moment, voice sharp as she berated the server for placing the tray incorrectly. The server's eyes watered as Jillian's true colors showed through the carefully maintained facade. Jillian noticed me watching and quickly shifted back to her party persona. She approached with an expensive bottle of wine from Brett's collection, offering it as a peace gesture. I recognized the label, an anniversary gift from Brett's mentor that was supposed to be saved for their 10th anniversary. I declined politely, watching her jaw tighten at the rejection. The reception area had thinned considerably as evening approached. Family members made excuses about early mornings and long drives, but the uncomfortable atmosphere drove most departures. Those who remained clustered in small groups, voices lowered as they avoided Jillian's increasingly erratic attention. I discovered a printed blog post on the cake table, Jillian's latest content, featuring Grandma Rose's sugar cookies. She'd photographed the recipe page before selling the book, presenting my grandmother's work as her own family tradition. The theft had become monetized content, each view another small betrayal. Marcus and Mason found me during a brief break from kitchen duties. They mentioned their mom's new rule about old toys: nothing cluttered could stay. Their collection of Brett's childhood action figures had disappeared last week, along with a vintage train set their grandfather had built. The pattern extended beyond valuable items to anything with sentimental worth. Brett appeared in the kitchen doorway looking for ice, mentioning his baseball card collection. He'd thought he sold them last month to help with bills, but Jillian quickly corrected him through the pass-through window. She insisted they'd been donated to charity, her voice carrying a warning edge. Brett's confusion was evident. He clearly remembered discussing a sale, not a donation. Emma's support solidified after Jillian made a cutting remark about her recent divorce. The comment, delivered with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes, pushed Emma past her breaking point. She joined me in the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves to help while muttering about Jillian's cruelty. Our small alliance felt like the first crack in Jillian's carefully maintained control. The urge to confront Jillian grew stronger with each revelation, but strategic patience would yield better results. She'd paint herself as the victim if challenged directly, twisting any accusation into evidence of family jealousy. Better to let her reveal herself through her own actions. During a toast that I watched from the kitchen doorway, Jillian raised her glass and spoke about the party representing family investment in their future. The bitter irony wasn't lost on those who'd unknowingly funded this celebration through loans and stolen items. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, beginning to piece together the truth. A neighbor who'd been invited as a courtesy mentioned seeing Jillian loading boxes into her car multiple times over recent months, always during work hours when Brett was at the office, always with boxes labeled donations that never seemed to make it to any charity. The systematic nature of the thefts became undeniable. Two of Jillian's friends gathered their purses after she drunkenly insulted one's parenting choices. The wine had loosened her tongue enough to reveal the contempt she usually kept hidden. Her friend's face crumpled at the harsh words about her daughter's development, while Jillian laughed as if she'd made a clever joke. The room's atmosphere shifted as more guests noticed Jillian's deteriorating behavior. She moved through the thinning crowd with her her wine glass perpetually full, her movements becoming less coordinated. Most guests had switched to water or stopped drinking entirely, creating a stark contrast to her increasing intoxication. I sent a subtle probe in the family group chat about missing items, keeping the tone light and curious. The response was silence. Messages read but unanswered. Everyone knew, but no one wanted to be the first to speak up. The weight of collective denial hung heavy in the digital silence. Emma confronted Jillian about the missing brooch near the dessert table. Jillian's response came quick and smooth. She'd returned it last week, didn't Emma remember? The gaslighting was masterful, making Emma doubt her own memory despite knowing the truth. I watched Emma's confidence waver under Jillian's assured lies. Brett pulled me aside during a quiet moment, his face drawn with worry. Money had been tight lately, but he couldn't understand why. His salary hadn't changed, their expenses seemed normal, yet their savings had dwindled. He'd started tracking purchases, but the numbers didn't add up. The confusion in his eyes revealed how thoroughly Jillian had manipulated their finances. Jillian appeared at Brett's shoulder within seconds, her internal radar detecting our private conversation. Most guests had stopped trying to engage with her, creating an island of empty space around her at her own party. She swayed slightly, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. Mark caught my attention from across the room, holding up his phone. He'd found online listings that matched items from Brett's collection: a signed jersey, vintage baseball programs, memorabilia that should have been priceless to my brother. He promised to send the links tomorrow when he could screenshot everything properly. The evidence mountain grew higher. I made sure Marcus and Mason stayed occupied with their cousins in the children's area, wanting to shield them from the growing tension. Their innocent chatter about school projects and weekend plans provided a stark contrast to the adult drama unfolding around them. Protecting them from the fallout became my secondary mission. Small groups of Brett's friends huddled near the bar, their conversation focused on his changed demeanor over the past year. They'd noticed his withdrawal from group activities, his increasing excuses for missed gatherings. The isolation pattern that I'd recognized was apparent to others too, though they'd been too polite to mention it directly. Jillian cornered the photographer, demanding he delete several unflattering shots from his camera. Her priorities revealed themselves in her focus on image over substance. The photographer looked uncomfortable as she scrolled through his camera, rejecting any photo where she wasn't perfectly positioned. A venue staff member paused while adjusting the lighting, mentioning the cake looked unusual under the new angle. The frosting seemed to glisten differently than normal, the structure appearing slightly off. They shrugged and continued their work, dismissing their observation as a trick of the light. My pulse quickened at the near miss. Emma and Mark formed the core of my support system, while others offered subtle acknowledgement through meaningful glances and small nods. The family's reluctance to fully commit reflected years of avoiding conflict, but cracks in their silence had begun to show. Not everyone would stand with me, but I wasn't completely alone. My phone buzzed with a response I'd been waiting for. The person who'd bought Brett's baseball cards had seen my message about them being stolen items. They confirmed the purchase from a Jillian B 2024 account and agreed to provide documentation. The seller had claimed the cards belonged to her husband, who didn't care about them anymore. Sunset approached as Jillian insisted on immediate cake cutting, despite half the guests having already left. Her desperation to capture the perfect moment overrode any consideration for those who'd departed. She directed the remaining guests to gather tightly around the cake table, creating an illusion of a full celebration. Jillian's treatment of Brett escalated publicly as she berated him for not mingling enough. Her words cut deep, each criticism designed to diminish him in front of his friends and family. Brett's shoulders slumped under the verbal assault, his earlier happiness completely extinguished. The emotional abuse had moved from private to public display. The truth crystallized as I watched their interaction. This went beyond stolen items and money. Jillian was systematically isolating Brett from every support system. Each sold treasure removed a connection to his past. Each severed relationship eliminated potential allies. The thefts were just tools in a larger campaign of control. I helped clean a wine spill near the gift table, choosing grace over gloating as Jillian's carefully planned evening unraveled. The high road felt lonely but necessary. Whatever happened next, I wanted my actions to stand in stark contrast to hers. Jillian's live stream audience had dwindled to 12 viewers as her slurred speech became more pronounced. She continued narrating to her phone as if thousands watched, describing the perfect party, while reality told a different story. The disconnect between her online fantasy and actual events grew more jarring with each update. Her college friend approached me while Jillian was distracted with photos. She mentioned this behavior felt familiar. Jillian had done something similar with an ex-boyfriend years ago. The pattern of isolation and control had existed long before Brett, suggesting a practiced methodology rather than situational cruelty. Brett found me arranging chairs and admitted he'd been tracking missing items for weeks. He'd thought his memory was failing, items disappearing that he could swear he'd seen recently. The gaslighting had worked so well he'd started doubting his own perception of reality. His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been manipulated into questioning their own sanity. Jillian interrupted our conversation with an ultimatum delivered at full volume. Brett needed to choose between her and his toxic family. The words echoed across the reception area, drawing attention from remaining guests. Several phones appeared, though whether to record or call for rides home wasn't clear. Brett's response came quietly but firmly. They'd discuss it at home. His attempt to delay confrontation felt like a small victory, the first time I'd seen him resist her demands in public. Marcus and Mason's toys disappearing breaks my heart. These poor kids are losing pieces of their childhood while their mom sells everything for party money. Jillian's face flushed darker than her spray tan, her control slipping with each passing moment. The cake-cutting ceremony began as the handful of remaining guests gathered around the display table. Jillian wielded the ornate knife with theatrical precision, positioning herself for the photographer's lens. The golden hour light streamed through the windows exactly as she'd planned, casting dramatic shadows across the pristine white frosting. She pressed the knife into the top tier, expecting the smooth glide through layers of sponge. Instead, the blade met unexpected resistance. Jillian's brow furrowed as she applied more pressure, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the handle tighter. The frosting cracked oddly, spider webbing across the surface in unnatural patterns. The first cut revealed the deception. Instead of moist chocolate cake, shaving cream oozed from between the cardboard layers, its artificial whiteness stark against the dark ganache exterior. Jillian stared at the mess, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The photographer lowered his camera, uncertain whether to continue documenting documenting. I stepped forward from my position near the kitchen entrance, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. I explained that this was what happened when someone sold family recipes for spray tan money. The words hung in the air as comprehension dawned on the remaining guests' faces. Emma moved to stand beside me, her phone already displaying screenshots she'd taken earlier. She showed Brett the eBay listing for Grandma Rose's recipe book, complete with Jillian's username and the pathetic $50 selling price. Other family members began murmuring their agreement, finally finding courage in numbers. Mark stepped forward next, describing the online listings he discovered for Brett's memorabilia. The signed jersey sold for a fraction of its worth, the baseball cards practically given away, each item representing a piece of Brett's history, converted to cash without his knowledge. Mark's voice remained steady as he laid out the evidence. More relatives found their voices, sharing stories of loans never repaid and items that mysteriously disappeared. The pattern became undeniable as each person added their piece to the puzzle. Jillian's carefully maintained image crumbled with every revelation. Jillian threw the cake knife onto the table, sending shaving cream splattering across the white linen. She accused me of orchestrating a planned sabotage, her voice rising to near hysterical levels. The remaining guests stepped back, creating more distance between themselves and her escalating rage. Security personnel hovered near the entrance, clearly debating whether to intervene. One made eye contact with me, but I shook my head slightly. This was family business, messy and complicated, but not requiring outside intervention. They remained at their posts, watchful but uninvolved. Brett stood frozen between his wife and the growing circle of family members presenting evidence. His face cycled through confusion, denial, and dawning realization as the scope of Jillian's deceptions became clear. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides as he processed the betrayal. I remained silent as Brett's world reshaped itself around the truth. There was no satisfaction in watching my brother's pain, no vindication in being proven right. The victory felt hollow, tinged with the sadness of what couldn't be salvaged. Brett turned to Jillian, his voice barely audible as he asked directly about the recipe book. She deflected initially, then shifted tactics when cornered. Yes, she'd sold it, but only because I didn't deserve it. The justifications poured out. I was selfish, holding on to the past, preventing progress. Each excuse revealed more of her true nature. Then came her masterstroke. Jillian claimed she'd been selling things to pay for Brett's secret therapy and medication. She painted herself as the protective wife, shielding him from judgment while managing his hidden problems. The accusation landed like a physical blow, designed to shift focus and cast doubt. The room fell completely silent. Brett's face went pale, then flushed with anger as he denied any gambling problems or secret therapy. He demanded she explain where the money had really gone, his voice gaining strength with each word. The power dynamic shifted visibly as Brett found his backbone. Jillian spun elaborate lies about protecting Brett from himself, but the details crumbled under scrutiny. She couldn't name the therapist or the medication. The timeline didn't match the thefts. Her story unraveled as quickly as she constructed it. Brett pulled out his phone, accessing their shared bank account with trembling fingers. The evidence appeared in stark numbers. Cash deposits matching the dates when family items went missing. Each transaction another betrayal documented in their financial history. One of Jillian's friends, emboldened by wine and the collective revelations, quietly admitted what she'd overheard. Jillian had bragged about funding shopping trips through decluttering, laughing about Brett's obliviousness. The friend's confession broke the last of Jillian's support network. I noticed Jillian's increasingly flirtatious behavior with the photographer throughout the evening, but chose to keep that observation to myself. The thefts and lies provided enough evidence without adding unnecessary complications. Some ammunition was better left unfired. Brett's announcement came with quiet finality. He needed space to think and wouldn't be going home with Jillian tonight. The boundary, small but significant, represented the first crack in her control. Jillian's face cycled through shock, rage, and calculated manipulation in rapid succession. The tears came next, perfectly timed and expertly delivered, but something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The performance that had worked so many times before now seemed transparent, the emotional manipulation too obvious to ignore. Even her remaining friends looked uncomfortable at the display. Marcus and Mason appeared at the edge of the crowd, their young faces confused by their mother's tears. Brett moved immediately, gathering his sons with gentle efficiency. He guided them toward the exit, his protective instincts overriding everything else. The boys' questions went unanswered as Brett focused on removing them from the toxic scene. Jillian's friend offered to drive her home, the only remaining gesture of support in a room full of turned backs. Jillian alternated between rage-filled accusations and self-pitying sobs as she was led away. Her exit lacked any dignity, the carefully crafted image completely shattered. Brett's text arrived an hour later as I helped venue staff clean the destroyed cake. The message was brief but significant. He was staying at Mark's place and we needed to talk tomorrow. The first step toward untangling the web of manipulation had been taken. The recipe book buyer responded to my earlier message with unexpected kindness. After seeing the family photos I'd sent showing Grandma Rose with her cookbook, they agreed to sell it back for the original $50. Shipping would take several weeks, but the book would return home. Small victories mattered in the aftermath of larger betrayals. Family members departed with awkward farewells, relationships strained but not completely severed. Some still thought the fake cake went too far, whispering about proper channels and private confrontations. Others pulled me aside to share their own stories of Jillian's manipulations, finally free to speak truth. I spent the remaining time helping venue staff clean the mess, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple task of restoring order. Shaving cream and fake frosting required multiple cleaning products, but gradually the space returned to its original pristine state. The physical act of cleaning felt symbolic, though I avoided dwelling on metaphors. 2 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner from Grandma Rose's returned cookbook. Brett arrived with Marcus and Mason, their weekend visits now a regular occurrence. He'd filed for separation but not divorce, taking time to understand his role in enabling Jillian's behavior through therapy he'd chosen for himself. Jillian had moved back with her parents, her social media filled with vague, inspirational quotes about new chapters and rising from ashes. The food blog disappeared quietly, the stolen recipes no longer generating the fame she'd craved. Her attempts to paint herself as the victim found little traction among those who knew the truth. The family dynamics had shifted, but not shattered. Some relatives still blamed me for the public confrontation, preferring the comfortable silence of previous years. Others had found courage to share their own stories of Jillian's exploitation. reputation, creating unexpected bonds through shared experience. Brett had recovered some of his father's belongings from local pawn shops, though several items were gone forever. The baseball cards returned from the understanding buyer. The signed jersey remained missing. Each recovered piece helped rebuild his connection to the past Jillian had tried to erase. The fake cake had become family legend, though versions differed depending on the teller. Some emphasized the humor of shaving cream filling, others focused on the cruelty of the deception. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the complex middle ground of justified anger and questionable methods. I'd learned that revenge didn't taste like I'd expected, not sweet like Grandma Rose's chocolate cake, not bitter like Jillian's cheap party wine. Instead, it carried the complex flavor of real life, necessary but uncomfortable, justified but costly, satisfying but tinged with sadness for what couldn't be saved. Grandma Rose's recipes lived on, now carrying new stories alongside the old. Her neat handwriting still marked family favorites, but the pages also held invisible memories of boundaries established, truth revealed, and the messy price of protecting what mattered. The cookbook had returned home changed but intact, much like the family itself. The fake cake might have been messy, but sometimes you need something shocking to make people pay attention. Thanks for reading this story with me.